Hey everyone, welcome to our Tea Time Tuesday. I have a bunch of amazing questions today that people have sent in that we're just gonna kind of rip through them. If you have any additional questions, you can put them in the chat. You can put them on Instagram or Facebook chat, or you can also send them to info@boosthealing.org, and we'll get through as many as we can today. Any questions that come through that we don't get through today, I'll do next month. All right, first question, nerve pain. I have had JRA, which is juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, since age 13, and now it has changed to psoriatic arthritis. I'm usually able to keep it under control with fish oil, osteobiflex, etc. I've finally figured out that my nerve pain in my fingers, toes, and the bottom of my feet are associated with my psoriatic arthritis. Is there anything I can do naturally to address the nerve pain and prevent nerve damage? The rheumatologist is very insistent that I start a biologic, which has a ton of side effects. Thank you. And this is from an Instagram user. So great question. The way I look at things is I like try and simplify it. Like, your body is so smart. And your body knows how to heal, and your body knows how to be in balance. If you cut yourself and you don't do anything else, you don't have to sit there. If you cut your arm, you don't have to sit there and say, like, cells, please join back together and heal my skin. Unless you cut an artery, it's just going to heal. So your body knows how to be in balance. Right now, it sounds like you've had autoimmunity for quite a while, and that means that your immune system is out of balance. So instead of using medicines such as steroids, which suppress your immune system, or biologics, my approach is like, hey, how can we help to get your immune system in balance? And then that's going to prevent further damage. Your immune system is intricately and intimately connected with your nervous system. So most of the immune system is in the gut, and the gut actually has its own nervous system, which is called the enteric nervous system. And it's connected to the central nervous system, which is your brain, your spinal cord, via the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is one of the cranial nerves. It's the longest nerve in the body. And so if you're having any sort of autoimmunity, anyone that has any autoimmunity, and we have all sorts of names for all the conditions. So you have psoriatic arthritis, but someone else listening might have another autoimmune condition, maybe multiple sclerosis or celiac disease or Hashimoto's or osteoarthritis. There's so many autoimmune conditions. Probably if I went through your whole body with a fine-tooth comb, I could find another autoimmunity that's happening with you. I don't really care what the diagnosis is. It's more that your immune system's out of balance. So how can we get it in balance? So the way I look at it is, hey, let's get your nervous system and your immune system in balance. And then most likely things are going to work themselves out. Your body, again, super intelligent. Like, no healer is ever healing anyone. It's your body that's healing yourself. So what does that look like, kind of on an actual, like, what do we do? One of the things that I would do is check your gut microbiome and help to get that in balance, again, because so much of your immune system is in your gut. If your gut is in balance, oftentimes autoimmunities get way better. Another thing I would do is to do treatments that are going to help to balance your nervous system. So the two main treatments, or three, I guess, main treatments that I really like, I like to use ketamine, which is a psychedelic to open up neuroplasticity, oftentimes at the beginning of any sort of nervous system reboots. And then I like stellate ganglion blocks and also hydrodissections of the cranial nerves, kind of at the very top vertebrae at C1, including the vagus nerve, to just kind of help to get things in balance. Oftentimes what happens is those nerves will get a little bit squished up there, and they don't send signals as well. And that can make things out of balance with your immune system. So it's kind of like a big picture approach with any sort of autoimmunity. And some of you might have heard me talk about the bathtub model that I use. So I think about your biologic system's capacity as a bathtub, and that includes everything. So that includes your immune system, your reproductive system, your adrenals, like all of your different systems in your body. And the water coming in the bathtub are all the internal and external stressors. So the stressors could be that your microbiome's off. It could be you didn't get enough sleep last night. It could be that your kid just got in an accident. We have stressors all the time. There's always water coming in. Could be that you're living in a moldy house, and the drain is your body's ability to basically get rid of those stressors. And the way I look at it is that when your bathtub's overflowing, you're going to have symptoms. When it's not, you're not. And so we look at like, hey, how can we make your bathtub bigger? How can we turn down the water? How can we open the drain so that your body has the bandwidth to heal itself? Hopefully that's helpful. And then one more thing to mention specifically, if there's certain nerves that are really upset, we can actually inject around them to help relieve those nerves as well. So you're talking about pain in your fingers, toes, and the bottom of your feet. So it might be that it's nerves that are kind of innervating those areas of your body are specifically irritated, and by releasing them with a procedure that we call hydrodissection, that can help as well. But I think big picture for any autoimmune condition, the approach is really to look at like what's happening on a more systemic level and how can we help to get your nervous system and your immune system in balance. And that's really going to be the answer to a lot of things, is get your nervous system and your immune system in balance, and everything else is going to kind of fall into place. All right. Great question. Next one is about fibromyalgia. So question is, I would love you to talk about fibromyalgia. It took such a long time to get a diagnosis, and it didn't help much because I wasn't given any guidance other than suggested antidepressants or anti-seizure meds. Could you please bring some light on fibro and possibilities for healing? Thank you in advance. Best regards, Jelena. So thanks for this question. Fibromyalgia. So I'm not so into diagnoses, into labels with people. So we use diagnoses and diagnostic codes really so that we can bill in the insurance system. And I think a lot of people like to have a diagnosis so that they know what's happening. And it's helpful sometimes. And at the end of the day, if you have fibromyalgia, like there's things out of balance in your body. What's causing the pain? Your nervous system is causing that pain. So I imagine that if I have a dial and I can turn the dial up until everything in your body hurts, or I can turn it down until nothing hurts. When you have fibromyalgia, it's like that dial is turned up. So what I like to do is to see what can we do to turn the dial down? What can we do to turn the sensitivity down? So nervous system reboots, again, stellate ganglion blocks, for those of you who haven't heard of them before, the stellate ganglion is a sympathetic nerve chain up in the neck. And it's a pretty quick procedure. It's like a 5-minute procedure. We inject a long-lasting anesthetic in there called ropivacaine, and it basically blocks that sympathetic chain for up to 6 hours, sometimes even a little more, somewhere between 2 to 6 hours. And it's a reboot. So you imagine with fibromyalgia, almost certainly your sympathetic nervous system is kind of upregulated. Your sympathetic nervous system is the flight, fight, fawn, freeze, the system that allows us to kind of survive for the next 5 minutes, but it's not great for long term. So like if I had a bear run into the room that I'm in right now, I would really want to be able to like punch that bear in the face and run out of the room. And if the bear bites me, I would want my blood vessels to be clamped down so I don't bleed that much. My blood pressure goes up, my heart rate goes up. It's amazing. I can survive the next 5 minutes, but it's not great for healing. It's not great for longevity. So anytime we can sort of get our nervous system more in balance and upregulate our parasympathetic and downregulate our sympathetic, most things are going to come into balance in terms of symptoms, things like fibromyalgia. So if you're parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest, if that is being suppressed, like again, if a bear is coming in here and I just ate food, you better believe my body is not working on digesting that food. My body is just trying to get me out of this room so that I survive. But again, amazing that we have this. And most of us, unfortunately, are living in sympathetic a good portion of our lives. And so it's kind of like our bodies are just trying to survive the next 5 minutes for days, weeks, months, years at a time. And ultimately, like we're not healing then and we feel out of balance. So I think with fibromyalgia, getting the nervous system in balance, and then again, kind of similar to the first question, nervous system and immune system. So if your immune system, if your gut is all inflamed and out of balance, that is also going to inflame your nervous system. So it might be, and I don't know your specific case, but I've seen people with fibromyalgia that their gut microbiome is really out of balance. They've got a lot of inflammation in their gut. That's causing effectively their central nervous system to be out of balance and inflamed, and that's causing a lot of pain. So oftentimes by getting the nervous system and the immune system and the gut in balance, the symptoms just completely go away. Antidepressants, let's just talk about that for a second, since you brought that up. Most of them, SSRIs, what they're doing is increasing the amount of serotonin that's circulating around your body, or it's not really increasing them. It's helping you to hold on to what you have. So let's say that you have optimal is 100 units of serotonin, and I'm just making these numbers up. And let's say that you only have 10 units of serotonin circulating around your body. So what the SSRIs are going to do is they're going to help you to hold on to those 10 units so that you don't metabolize them out of your body. They're not actually helping you to make more serotonin. Most of the serotonin is actually made in the gut. And so by helping the gut to be in balance, you produce more serotonin, and then you don't need to take the antidepressants. So my approach is always like, hey, how can we get your body to make more of these things that make you feel better on your own? And sometimes there needs to be a little bit of a bridge where we support things temporarily, but long-term, for sure, much better to get your microbiome in balance. And we know that when serotonin is low, symptoms like depression go up, chronic pain, all of that. So that's why antidepressants can be helpful for some people with fibromyalgia. And by addressing the underlying causes of those imbalances, like getting the gut imbalance and getting the nervous system in balance, everything just gets better in general. And then of note with that, that's kind of like the low-hanging fruit kind of first level approach. And then let's say that you did that, you addressed your gut and your nervous system, and you still afterwards still have some symptoms, maybe it's 50% better. Then we want to look at like what other things are causing chronic inflammation. So I always look at inflammation. I think of inflammation as the cause of kind of all diseases and aging. I like the word inflammaging. And so anything that's going to cause inflammation is going to cause aging and the diseases of aging. So for you, like maybe it's that you had mercury fillings at some point, or maybe you still have them, and that's just causing kind of chronic underlying inflammation in your body. Lots of people have food allergies. Like a common one is gluten, that when people cut out gluten, a lot of these chronic symptoms go away. It's a really simple thing. And the interesting thing, especially with foods, is our microbiome, we're made up more of bugs than we are of cells, and our microbiome kind of controls us. So when you have cravings for certain foods, like let's say you love gluten and you love having, bread or pasta or whatever, that's because you have bugs in you that love those. And if you cut them out, those bugs are going to be upset. And they're not going to be like consciously upset, but you're kind of starving them, and you're going to get a reaction to that. So it takes about 6 weeks to adjust after you cut something out or to add. So let's say you decided today that you're like, I'm going to add smash fish. Smash fish are the cold water fish that have really high omega fatty acids. So sardines, mackerels, anchovies, salmon, and herring. Really, really healthy fish to eat. Lots of people don't like fish. If you decided today they're going to start eating them instead of taking fish oil tablets, or instead of not having fish oil, but you hate the taste of fish, it's probably going to take you about 6 weeks. And then if you actually stick with it for 6 weeks, you'll like the taste of that fish after, and you'll actually crave it. Conversely, if you want to cut something like gluten or sugar or dairy out, it's going to take you probably 6 weeks before you stop having those withdrawal symptoms. And a lot of these big proteins like gluten can actually get stuck in the biofilm in your gut, and it can stay in your body for up to 7 months. So if you cut out something like gluten today, it might be still kind of causing smoldering fuel for your fire of inflammation for up to 7 months. So that's why a lot of times we don't see results right away. People will cut things out for 2 weeks and they're like, it didn't make a difference. Well, it's because it's still in your body. So sort of complex answer to your question, but I think basically like anything that's going to decrease your inflammation, get your nervous system and your gut in balance are going to help with this and probably make it completely go away. Okay, great question. Next question, Halgan's deformity. I had surgery last year to collect a Helgen's deformity. The bone spur was removed and they debrided the affected portion of my Achilles tendon before reattaching it. After being immobilized in a cast for 8 weeks and in a boot for another 6 weeks, I went through approximately 6 months of physical therapy. Hydrodissection in June of this year helped me regain temporary mobility and ability, but the effects were brief, and by August, I was back to square one. It's been nearly 13 months since surgery, and I am still experiencing pain in the area, limited range of motion, and haven't been successful in regaining post-operative strength. New imaging also shows the bone spur has grown back. My question has 2 parts. 1, what could cause a bone spur to grow back so quickly? My mobility and movement has been limited since surgery, so the usual culprits of overuse, impact, etc., don't make sense. And 2, what would the integrative medicine approach be like to an issue like mine? Mainstream medical doesn't seem to know what to do with me. And the question's from Megan. Okay, great question. So the first thing that comes to mind, and anyone who is listening who works with me knows that I like to approach both the 3D and the 4D when I'm looking at helping to get people in balance. So the 3D I think of as our physical reality, and the 4D as our energetic reality. So I look at like, what is your body trying to tell you here? So our bodies are always trying to give us messages. Our bodies are really smart, and most of us do not listen to our bodies. So, for example, like your Achilles, I am certain is trying to send you some message. What it is, I'm not sure. There's a book that I recommend for people to look at that's called Your Body Loves You. And it's basically a little encyclopedia. It's by an author named Lise Bourbeau. And it's an encyclopedia of metaphysical causes for physical illness and diseases. And what that looks like is, you could look up like, what is Achilles tendon? What do Achilles tendon problems mean in terms of mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual blocks? And I don't know what it is, but we know we've heard about people talking about, Achilles heel for millennia. That's been like a thing that people use, like, oh, that's my Achilles heel. That's something that's kind of preventing me from moving forward. So what I would say with this is you have addressed the 3D reality with these hydrodissections and treatments, but you haven't addressed the 4D reality of like, what is the message that your spirit is trying to share with you? And only you can know what that is. But I think if you read the book, that would probably be helpful around Achilles to see what the message is. And then another thing with that is like, why did it grow back so quickly on a 3D level? Probably the underlying inflammation has not been addressed. So our body will produce things like cysts, lipomas, which are fatty tumors, calcifications, to try and like duct tape a situation of inflammation and to make it as functional as possible. So, in this case, if your tendon is, got stressed initially and it couldn't heal fast enough, so it put calcium in there, instead of healing like a normal tendon should, which is very common that this happens. It's very common when I'm examining people with ultrasound that I find calcifications in there. And that means that the injury couldn't heal with the normal tendon fibers, but the body was like, okay, but we need to put something in there. So we're going to put calcium in there. Another thing to think about is some people just genetically are more predisposed to having tendon problems. So it could be that your body naturally is more predisposed to tendinosis, to problems with your tendon. And so how do we kind of combat that with people that do have these genetic variants? Taking things like collagen supplements, making sure that you're getting all the building blocks adequately, but it's an inflammatory condition basically that something underlying hasn't been addressed. So most likely, again, you're going to hear me probably say this with all the questions. Most likely, there's like a nervous system and a gut/immune system imbalance that's happening here. If your immune system keeps throwing calcium there and not healing it as it should, that's probably because there's an imbalance. So by getting your nervous system in balance, and it gets your immune system in balance, and then things heal better. In terms of hydrodissection, so hydrodissections are amazing to kind of like release the nerves around there and to release the strictures. And if you're just doing hydrodissection with straight up dextrose, sometimes that doesn't actually help things to heal as well. It can just release it. So I imagine, like, I use the analogy of like, imagine if I put a rubber band around my little finger here, and tight to the point that it started to lose circulation and then eventually started to turn black. The first move is going to be to cut off that rubber band to restore circulation. But if the tissue is really damaged, and let's say that the skin has actually started to necrose and starting to die away, I might need to get a skin graft or get some sort of regenerative treatment to prevent losing my finger. So the same thing happens with our nerves. When we do hydrodissections, or in this case, a tendon, we release it. It's like cutting that rubber band, but we might need other things to actually help it to heal. So that's kind of how I would look at this. And I think, like, foundationally, it's like your body's trying to tell you something. So what is your body trying to tell you? And talking to your body, if you haven't talked to your body, like, let's say, you're in your 40s, you haven't talked to your body for 40 years, which is most of us. And then you start talking to your body and you're like, okay, Achilles, I'm ready to listen. What's your message for me? Your body's not going to talk back. It's kind of like if you have a relationship with a friend and you don't talk to them for a long time, or a family member, and you start trying to talk to them, they're going to be a little bit skeptical and they might not answer your calls, and you have to be persistent and just come in with this like real curiosity, loving presence. So do that with your body. And I recommend that people have like at least 5 minutes, like really like concerted effort of like, hey, I'm gonna listen to what my body has to say for 20 days. And then it's usually by 20 days, your body will start talking back. Oftentimes after like 5 or 6 days, people are like, this feels crazy. I'm not going to keep doing it. But once you open up a dialogue with your body, it's amazing. Because then, like, you might have shoulder pain and you just ask your body, like, okay, what's the message with the shoulder pain? And maybe the message is like, hey, you need to rest. Or maybe the message is like, you shouldn't do this thing that you were planning on doing. Like, our bodies give us a ton of information. Lie detectors. What are lie detectors? They're sensing like sweating on the skin. Like we know there have been lots of tests that can show, like, if you're doing a test, for example, and you're doing the wrong answer, like your body intelligently knows, and we can sense it with things like skin moisture long before we know consciously. So most of us are using barely any of our brain and not any of our body to make our decisions in life. And our bodies, what happens if we don't listen to our bodies, the message gets louder and louder. So, in this case, you developed all this stuff with your Achilles, and whatever the message is, you probably didn't get the message yet. And so it's getting louder and louder. And it might end up that, like, your body's like, okay, she's not going to listen to the Achilles, so we're going to do something else for whatever the message is. So the message gets louder and louder. And I think of it as like, I think of all this more on a spiritual path. So if your spiritual path is like a GPS taking you to a certain destination and you take a wrong turn, like if you're trying to go, I'm in Victor, Idaho right now. If I'm trying to drive over to Jackson, Wyoming, and I take a wrong turn, the GPS is going to reroute me. And the same thing happens on our spiritual path. If we start going in the wrong direction, like we'll get rerouted. Maybe in this case, your Achilles injury is the rerouting. Well, if you don't listen to that rerouting and you keep going further and further off, the message gets louder and louder. And everyone listening to this right now, I'm sure, has had a personal experience or known someone where it's been like something catastrophic happens, which in the moment feels terrible, but then downstream was the best thing that could have happened to them. And that's really just your spirit being like you're off of your path and get back on your path. And I think we don't talk about this stuff that much in medicine, but the more that I do this, and for those of you who haven't met me before, like, my background is, I have a degree in chemical engineering, medical doctor, multiple fellowships, et cetera, like very rooted in science. And the more I do this, the more I realize that I really believe a lot of this is all spiritual growth for us in terms of what's happening with the physical body. And so by looking at both the emotional, physical, spiritual, 3D and 4D, we can get people into balance way faster. Okay. Awesome question. The next one, boosting REM and deep sleep. I feel like I sleep well, but I feel like I should also be boosting my REM and deep sleep. Do you have a recommendation on the percentage of sleep in those categories to strive for and what best aid? Currently, I measure this with my Fitbit, and I'm over their benchmark in the light sleep category. I do wake up refreshed and have energy all day, but I would love to give my body the deepest rest I can. Awesome. Great question. So super important that sleep is not just like the time that you're in bed. So great that you're recognizing that, Judy. And a lot of people, will say, I sleep for 7 hours a night, but that means that they're in bed for 7 hours a night. Most people need to actually be having deep, or not deep sleep, but need to actually be sleeping between 7 to 9 hours, which means they need to be in bed between 8 to 10 hours, because everyone has periods of time when they're sleeping that they're not actually getting restorative sleep. So deep sleep, super important. I'm going to do broad strokes here. Deep sleep, super important for healing the body. REM sleep, super important for the brain. And it's, of course, much more nuanced than that. You want to make sure you're having plenty of both. Deep sleep generally happens at the beginning of the night, REM at the end of the night. Again, broad strokes here. There's a book by Matthew Walker called Why We Sleep, which I would recommend if you're interested, kind of diving into that. In terms of the percentages, there's lots of different biofeedback devices. The Oura Ring I have this here. It's the best one. And for those of you who don't know what it is, I think you can see this. It's got like little sensors in the middle that measure your different types of sleep. So REM, deep, light. It also measures your oxygen saturation, heart rate variability, heart rate. There's lots of other different gadgets out there, Garmin, Fitbit, Whoop, etc. I haven't done a deep dive recently. When I did a couple of years ago, I was definitely struggling with my sleep downstream of shift work for many years. I found that the Oura Ring at that time, at least, was the best for optimizing sleep. So I don't know, I can't comment now on how Fitbit compares to Oura, but I know a couple of years ago, the sleep numbers didn't seem to be as accurate. And again, that might be totally inaccurate now. I think like the fact that you're waking up refreshed and having energy throughout the day is a really good sign. And you don't want to get too caught up on numbers, because the gadgets are gadgets, and they're not perfect, and they're using algorithms to estimate what your deep sleep and REM sleep is, but it's not 100% accurate no matter what device you're using. So the waking up refreshed and having good energy is way more important. Like if someone has perfect numbers and they wake up feeling really sleepy and tired throughout the day, then I'm more concerned about that. In general, though, how to increase your deep sleep, usually it means going to bed earlier. There's all sorts of sleep hygiene recommendations that you may or may not know about. A lot of them are pretty simple, like sleep in a dark, relatively cold, quiet room. So having an environment that is not going to be disruptive, making sure you don't eat for at least 3 hours before you go to sleep, staying out of blue light. So I recommend wearing blue light blocking glasses at night, so that you're not stimulating your brain. And you'll see if you wear, especially the orange blue light blocking glasses, when you put those on, immediately your brain just kind of calms down and you feel more relaxed. As you get older, as we get older, as anyone gets older, we produce less melatonin. So sometimes that can be helpful. As women and men get older, our hormones shift. And so for women, like progesterone and estradiol, when those are shifting, that's going to definitely impact your ability to have good, deep restorative sleep. That's oftentimes one of the first things that we see with menopause, is that people start having sleep disturbances. And I think when I first learned hormone replacement, what I learned was, hey, we shouldn't replace hormones until after women stop menstruating. And I've kind of changed my tune to that with listening to a lot of work with Sarah Gottfried, who's done a lot of research into this. And she is an OB-GYN who also has extensively worked in functional medicine. And her mom, I believe, has Alzheimer's. So she's really dug into this, that like as women, as we hit like perimenopause and our estradiol drops, so does our cognitive abilities and our immune function. So the idea is like, hey, like intervene early before those things start to drop. And a lot of people really find that when they get their hormones optimized, sleep is way better as well. Other things that important with sleep is like, really your sleep starts with how you start your day. So as soon as I try, and as much as possible, I recommend this to everyone, as soon as you get up, or almost as soon as you get up, get outside and get the sunlight on your eyes. That's going to help with your morning, like cortisol spike, and then it'll go down throughout the day. A lot of people have reversed cortisol curves just with how we live our lives. So we kind of like, we'll have a slump and then it goes up at the end of the day when we should be kind of landing the plane and sleeping. So getting out and even just while you're brushing your teeth, just like walking outside for a second will help you to sleep at night. Also, if you're having a bunch of stress during the day, that's going to impact your sleep at night. So meditation is huge. Lots of people, don't meditate or feel like they don't have time to meditate. They can't quiet their brain. And then all those thoughts and stuff are going to come up at night, and that's going to impact your sleep. So meditating ideally a couple times a day. I love Ziva meditation because I think it's like the easiest onboarding ramp for people. And I think, one of the things with it is like meditation for people who can't meditate or don't have the time to meditate. So that's something to consider as well to optimize your sleep. And then all the stuff we talked about before in terms of nervous system optimization. If you are in sympathetic, you're not going to sleep as well. And it sounds like, Judy, that you're doing pretty well. You're just kind of in the optimization, which is amazing. Most Americans, I would say, that are normal are totally really far from optimized. So it sounds like you're in the category where like you're doing pretty well and you're up for optimization. So almost certainly just living in our world, and especially downstream of the pandemic, you would benefit from some nervous system reboots to help optimize you and to help your sleep. So I think that kind of addresses a lot of the things around sleep. One more thing, I guess I'll just mention, just to bring gut in there as well, with the neurotransmitters that are produced in your gut. If you're serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, like all these neurotransmitters that make us feel good, are mostly produced in our gut. So if your gut is out of balance, you're not going to produce as many of them. If you feel anxious during the day, it's going to impact your sleep at night. So I think a lot of it, again, like the longer I do this, it really feels like it's all coming back to like nervous system and immune system, which is in the gut. And then also like, what are the spiritual messages? So, if you have insomnia, that usually has to do with anxiety from like that book that I was talking about, looking at what are the metaphysical causes. So what is anxiety? And a lot of people are showing up right now to heal generational trauma. So this is kind of the first time really recently in the history of humanity that a lot of people have their basic needs taken care of, and we actually can do this heavy lift of healing generational trauma. We all hold in our bodies up to 15 generations of trauma. And my bet is it's way more than that. We just haven't been able to prove that yet. I don't know how they've proved the 15 either, but people used to say 12 and I heard 15 recently. So in my body, I have trauma from my great grandmother and grandfather. And it's stuck in my nervous system. So a lot of times with the treatments that we do in the office, I might be just doing like a release for chronic neck pain or headaches. And people sometimes have really strong visions of something that happened, to their great grandmother or past life, or something that happened maybe in this lifetime, but before they could remember, like when they were 2 years old. So, and when that comes up, it's like the emotions get released. So people will start crying and they tell me, I'm not in pain. I don't know where this is coming from. It's oftentimes very confusing. And I think what happens is that those emotions get stuck in the nervous system and then it gets released. And that's why I also, I don't think it really matters if you can consciously remember what happened, because we can only remember, maybe from like at the earliest 3 years until however old we are in this lifetime. We're holding trauma from before we can remember in this lifetime, and then generational. So talk therapy is not unhelpful, but it can't get to this deeper level of healing of like what's stuck in the nervous system. And if we have stuff stuck in our nervous system from many generations, that can be impacting our sleep. And how privileged are we right now that we can actually heal that? Like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 400 years ago, first of all, we didn't understand how this works. And then we definitely didn't have the bandwidth. And there's still, of course, many people on the planet, unfortunately, who are still in the place where they are just in survival. They're trying to figure out how am I going to feed myself and how am I going to stay alive? And if you're in that survival mode, you're not worried about healing generational trauma. That's traumatic in itself. But we're at this place right now where there are a lot of people who do have the bandwidth and are coming in with physical symptoms, but really what's happening is they're healing generations of trauma. And it's a really beautiful thing. And it's a really heavy lift. So I always acknowledge that to people when they're coming in. And as each individual heals, it's like a ripple effect around them. And it's really beautiful to watch. And I think like humanity is at this real pivotal place right now where we've got these beautiful expansions happening at the same time that we have these huge conflicts and the capacity to kind of decimate the planet in a blink. And so I think this is like such an amazing time to be alive. And I just have so much reverence for all of you out there listening to this who are doing the work of healing the trauma and being and spreading your light. Awesome question. So next question, antidepressants. I have been taking a low-dose SNRI for a long time and wonder what other tools I might be able to use in place of them. So great question, Sandy. And probably your question, if you've been listening to this whole webinar, your question has been largely answered at this point. But like long story short is like anytime we have imbalances of neurotransmitters and we don't have enough of something that's making us not feel good, so serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, etc. The approach, a lot of the pharmaceutical approach, as I was saying with the serotonin, is to like hold on to what we have. And what I look at is like, hey, let's get our gut producing more. So most likely for you, your microbiome's out of balance and you're not producing enough. And you might also, usually it's a multifactorial. So you probably also have some genetic predisposition to having low levels, and then you probably your nervous system's also out of balance. So my approach is always like doing all the things together. Genetics are only about 10% of the story. So if you have a genetic predisposition to antidepressants, but you have a balanced nervous system and your gut is healthy and you're living a healthy life, probably you're not going to have any problems. So it's always looking at like, okay, what is my genetic predisposition? How can I live my life to prevent those things from actually playing out? I think in the case of like what you can do, what tools would be helpful, all the stuff that we talked about, like what things are causing inflammation for you, because anything that's causing inflammation is going to increase your chance of having depression and in imbalances in your microbiome. So I would want to look at your microbiome. I would also want to look at your nervous system and see what's happening with that. So most likely some of these nervous system reboots, microbiome balancing would be helpful for this. And then next level, as I mentioned in one of the other questions, next level is kind of looking at other toxins like mold, heavy metals, potentially chronic infection, stuff like that. But I think like anytime you're on a pharmaceutical long-term without someone addressing the root cause, that should give anyone listening to this pause. So there certainly are some pharmaceuticals and drugs that people need to be on long-term. And we certainly start people on pharmaceuticals and supplements, sometimes short-term, sometimes long-term, and always be questioning like, hey, am I addressing the root cause? And is there a way that I can get off of this? And sometimes the answer is no. Like as we get older, for example, if we're producing, I started to talk about melatonin before, and then I think I went on to something else. But if we're producing less melatonin as we get older, maybe we need some support with the melatonin until we can figure out better ways to help us to produce our own melatonin. And there are some ways, and I think the direction that probably regenerative medicine is moving in is instead of hormone replacement therapy, like how can we get our ovaries, for example, to produce hormones longer? So we know now that we can do things like injecting regenerative products into the ovaries that then have women who are menopausal start menstruating again and they can become pregnant again. So I think like we're certainly at this time where we can reverse a lot of this. And in the meantime, we do have to support these hormones to optimize the body until we get to that place where, hey, we know it's safe to use regenerative medicine to help us produce our hormones longer. So I think like big picture though, like if you've been on this low dose SNRI for a long time, like the question is like, is it actually helping you? A lot of times meds that people are on for a long time, it's not really helping you anymore? So that's one question. And then two, like, what's the root cause? And has that been addressed? And if it has, and it is helping you, then maybe it's good to stay on it. But otherwise, most of the time with this combination of like psychedelics, nervous system reboots, gut, addressing the gut, things get in balance and people don't need to be on meds long term. Awesome. Next next question, sorry. Uterine fibroids. Is it possible to dissolve uterine fibroids through the integrative approach? And this question is from Lily. So dissolve is an interesting term. I would say it is certainly possible for uterine fibroids to reverse. So the way I think about it is like our body, uterine fibroids are also, broadly speaking, an inflammatory reaction. And so if you get your body in balance, your body knows that that's not optimal. We have plenty of stories now of like spontaneous healings, right? So people that have stage 4 metastatic cancer, for example, and are told they have 3 weeks to live, that they do something and have, oftentimes it's an energetic shift in the way that they're thinking and their emotions. They have a shift and then they go back and the scans are clear and all the doctors are scratching their heads and they get written up as a case report. So I believe from these reports and from what I've seen that like pretty much everything is reversible. But there's not, as far as I know, there's not like something that we could like inject that's just going to dissolve them. It's more like getting your body in balance with all the things that we've talked about, the nervous system and immune system, and then your body kind of knows to heal itself. Certainly can do regenerative injections into things like fibroids to help signal to the body to get in balance. So it's regenerative injections, long story short, are just signaling to the immune system to go to a certain area and heal it. And I'm simplifying it broad strokes, but it started in the time of the gladiators where there would be, or maybe even before that, but with the gladiators, if they had rotator cuff injuries, for example, that weren't healing, they would use hot pokers, stick them back into the tendons, kind of re-injure the area, which would then stimulate the immune system to go back there. Generally speaking, our immune system has this cascade for an injury where after about 3 months, the body has decided, hey, this is fine. It's not killing me. I don't need to do anything else. Like this is perfect. And so I think like big picture with this, like with uterine fibroids, we might be able to use signaling molecules to signal to your body, hey, get back in here. We're certainly not going to use hot pokers. But with now what we do with things like rotator cuff injuries is use signaling molecules like PRP that signals to your body like, hey, immune system, get over here and heal this, if that makes sense. Cool. And then I think just like overall decreasing inflammation is going to help with that. All right, sex drive. I would love to hear a variety of suggestions in that area to boost sex drive. Awesome. So great question. With all of my patients, I encourage them to use sexual energy to help with their health goal manifestation. So for example, if your goal is to not have uterine fibroids anymore, I always have everyone point positive. So like my uterus is super healthy. And then I invite people to bring in those intentions when they're spreading sexual energy. So after an orgasm, that's been used for thousands of years. People call it sex magic, pleasure parrot, lots of different things. You can use it for other things besides health outcomes, but I'm selfish. And so with my patients, I use it for health outcomes. And also those neurotransmitters, oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, make us feel really good as well. So I love the idea of whatever we can do to boost sex drive. So for women in particular, most of us are pretty conditioned to be pretty separated and pretty detached from our sexual energy, from our second chakra, from our area of our center of creativity. We're told that if we are spreading that energy, or if we're using it, that we're bad, we're slutty, whores, et cetera, so much shame around it. So we get this programming from a pretty young age that it's not safe, and that, we might get hurt or we're going to hurt someone, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's the first thing to mention to boost sex drive, is to clear all that programming that tells us it's bad.
And clearly, like, sexual energy is not bad. It's super powerful. It creates other humans. I would argue it's the most creative thing that a human does, is to create another human. So how do we change that programming? There's lots of different ways. I've been fortunate to be around a lot of women that are doing a lot of amazing work in this area. So Mama Gina, Layla Martin, Emily Fletcher, they're all doing various different programs to kind of help bring women back into their power. There are pleasure coaches out there that can help you to get that energy flowing as well. If you feel like, Judy, like you've got that energy flowing, you just want to increase it. Other things that I always look at is like, are your hormones optimized? Do you have any nerve damage? So people that are mountain bikers or bikers, for example, the nerves can kind of impact the ability to sense a lot of pleasure. If there's been sexual trauma, that just like I was talking about, any trauma getting held in the nerves, sexual trauma, of course, is going to get held in the nerves. So all those nerves that are innervating that area, so sacral plexus nerves, the nerves in your lower spinal cord, those nerves, if they're holding that trauma, they might be sending like a no signal if you try to have any sexual activity, and that might come up as like severe pain. I've had many patients that like cannot have pleasure, they cannot have orgasms, and it's from trauma. And so we have to help to kind of shift those nerves, reboot those nerves, to show those nerves that like, hey, it's safe now. That's something that happened in the past. The way that pleasure coaching works is basically like getting rid of, not getting rid of, I shouldn't say that, like integrating and feeling all the things that are keeping us from being in pleasure. So there's lots of different tools, but when we're kind of built, when we're filled up with like a lot of grief, anger, resentment, etc., it's really hard to feel pleasure. And most women in particular have this sort of like, it's like a blessing and a curse with pleasure. Like if we feel like we're not allowed to have pleasure, and we feel like if we're in pleasure, that it's sort of like we're being selfish, we're being greedy, and like women are so creative. So like that sexual energy is probably what's going to save humanity, if we do save humanity. So I think like the more that we get women into their power and into their pleasure, and you asked specifically about sex drive, but it's all kind of related. So when women are turned on and in their high turn on and pleasure and creative energy, like anything is possible. And so I think the main thing is like, what are the barriers? Because that's our birthright and how we are without all these constructs is like, we are like, humans are very sexual beings. When we look at where humans evolved from, like we learned in school that our DNA is the closest to chimps, so that we get told like, hey, when we get together with someone else, we fight just like chimps. But there's a book called Sex at Dawn, which talks about this, that we're actually closer to bonobos, which is where our apes, that when they get together and there's conflict, they have sex with each other. And humans are actually much closer to that. But we have all sorts of constructs, religious constructs, et cetera, that say that sex is bad and harmful, and it creates a ton of trauma. And then what happens is it comes out in harmful ways like rape, et cetera. And then that trauma gets stuck in our body. So again, we're at this really beautiful time where we can heal generations of sexual trauma. I would argue that every single human alive right now has sexual trauma in their body, male or female, maybe not from this lifetime, but certainly generationally. Like I can almost guarantee that you have someone in your lineage, like your mom, grandmother, great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother, maybe grandfather, who has sexual trauma, and that is in your nervous system. So by healing that with some of these nervous system treatments that we do, and there's lots of other ways as well, that can help you to increase your sex drive, so that's not stuck in you. And then also, when we talk about parts work, there's the parts of you that have been abused that we try and push away, those parts that are like afraid of sex, afraid of sex drive, that they think it's going to be harmful, bringing them to the table, listening to them, acknowledging them, praising them, and seeing what they need. So again, it's kind of like talking to our body, like, what do we need? What are the things that are keeping us from being like these beautiful, light, energetic, ecstatic bodies that we are. Awesome. Next question, preparing for menopause. Curious what your integrative approach is to preparing for menopause. I'm a female in my mid-40s with sleep issues, and I'm taking melatonin. And this question's from Sarah. So this kind of goes back to what I was talking about in terms of like our with Sarah Godfrey, that our estradiol starts to really drop pretty precipitously, like our late 30s, early 40s. And so really getting on board with hormone replacement early with perimenopause and not waiting until you stop bleeding. So sleep issues a lot of times have to do with progesterone and estradiol. Melatonin, we talked about that already. Melatonin's great. The one thing I didn't mention about melatonin, lower doses are great for initiating sleep. Higher doses are good for inflammation, also cancer protection. I get a lot of questions with hormones of like, hey, is this going to shut down my body's ability to produce my own hormones? Like if I take melatonin, is there going to be a feedback? Yeah, for sure there's going to be a feedback. Like we have feedback mechanisms in our body all the time. And ideally, we come up with ways that we can continue to produce optimal levels of hormones in our bodies until we die. We talk about health span, lifespan, and disease span. So the lifespan is how long you live. So let's say that you live to be 100 years old. That is your lifespan. Let's say that you are sick from 50 to 100. And sick could just mean like, you don't have your sleep is suboptimal. You struggle with anxiety a lot. Like maybe you have some, intermittent autoimmunity. It doesn't mean like you're sick in bed the whole time, but that would mean that your health span is 50 years, your disease span is 50 years. Ideally, our aspirational goal is that our health span is basically as long as our lifespan, so that we live for 100 years and we're healthy right up until 100. So to do that, in order to be healthy, we need to support ourselves with all these hormones that get low as we get older. And as I mentioned earlier, I think we're at this amazing time where we can reverse things, by supporting our organs to produce our own hormones, but that's not totally ready for prime time quite yet. And that would be way better than just, throwing a bunch of bioidentical hormones. But for now, I think like that's an optimal thing as you're going through menopause. Something to note is a lot of times women, I think society thinks that like PMS symptoms are inevitable, and that menopausal symptoms are inevitable. And really, it's all inflammation. So if people are not, I'm sure if you ask around, you have friends, family members, etc., who don't have any PMS symptoms and who have gone through menopause without any symptoms. And that's really how it should be. And it's inflammation that causes all these symptoms. So, and again, anything that's going to decrease your inflammation is going to decrease your aging, the inflammaging thing. So as we go through menopause, decreasing our inflammation is going to help with everything. Awesome question there. Okay, next one, herbal approach to perimenopause. I really don't know if I want to take hormones, and I wonder how you approach perimenopause herbally. So yeah, great question. So I kind of just addressed that a little bit. I think inflammation is huge. There's lots of herbs that can help support your own production of hormones, and I love herbs to support the body. Adaptogens are great in general, and it takes longer. It's a heavier lift, and they're not as effective to have the same optimal levels. I don't ever like to step out of my lane. I'm not an expert in herbs. I did an integrative medicine fellowship and we did a section on it. I don't have anything against herbs. We use some adaptogens to help support women going through menopause. And I think it's hard to get those levels of the hormones optimal without at this point, without actually taking the hormone. So my approach is to use both. And then I'm always looking for the next step, which is hopefully ways to keep our body producing optimally. Okay, another question. I often have a unilateral migraine around day 19 to 22 of my cycle, and often at the end of my bleeding. I'm a 47-year-old female. Curious what tools might help me so I don't use over-the-counter meds. So migraines, I don't know if this is like truly a migraine or if it's a headache. So this, this is going to go back to like, what is your body trying to tell you here? So looking at that when, and I don't know how long your cycle is. So let's say that your cycle is a 28-day cycle, and what's happening is this is kind of like during your second spike of hormones, your high progesterone and high estradiol phase, the highest of that. So it might be that what's happening is you're having a bunch of prostaglandins release, and it's inflammation basically. So if you don't want to take anything, what we want to look at is like, okay, why is your immune system getting a little revved up during this time? The female immune system is much more complex than the male immune system, because we have to allow an embryo and a fetus to grow without killing it. And so that's amazing. And it also makes it, because it's so complex, makes women more likely to develop autoimmunities and to have imbalances in the immune system. So I would look at like, hey, what's causing the underlying inflammation? So simple thing that I've seen with this exact same scenario with people, and I've seen this multiple times with people getting kind of cyclical headaches monthly with their cycles, is just like cutting out something like gluten. So gluten can be super inflammatory for some people, and that inflammation can cause headaches. So that's like a really simple thing that might be helpful. You can certainly take things like curcumin, or phytoprofen is a supplement that it's kind of like ibuprofen, but with phytonutrients. You can take things that are going to decrease inflammation, and ideally looking at like what is causing the inflammation and getting rid of that. It's going to be the most helpful. Oftentimes, what can happen is when people don't sleep well, inflammation goes up, and that contributes as well. Awesome. And there's one more question, which I'll just answer quickly. Headaches. I travel a lot during this time of year, which seems to aggravate my headaches. What can I do to support myself and lessen the frequency and severity of my headaches? This question's from Dolly. So same answer again, like nervous system, immune system. Like if you're getting headaches, that's like your bathtub overflowing, your body's trying to tell you something. I would look at like, are you not sleeping well when you're traveling? What's causing you to be inflamed? Something that you can do that's actually like a technical solution that I like are sphenopalatine ganglia blocks. So you have a group of nerves behind your nasal passage that kind of lie against your cribriform plate going into your brain, called your sphenopalatine ganglia. And you can drip just buffered dextrose in there, almost like a neti pot, and you lie with your head back, and the dextrose sits in there for 5 to 20 minutes. And that can help calm down those nerves, which really can help the headache. So when I worked in the ER, I started doing those for patients that came in with headaches, and it was pretty amazing how many patients got better. And these are patients with severe enough headaches that they're coming to the ER. It's amazing how many people got better with just that. So it really just, again, points to inflammation of the nerves. Any way that we can calm down the nerves is going to help with the headaches. All right, awesome. So that concludes this Tea Time Tuesday. Thanks everyone for showing up. Any questions that you have? That I answered all the ones that came up this time. If you have additional questions, send them in, and we'll see you next month. And we'll be sending this out tomorrow as well in the email, and we'll put the link in the social medias as well. Thanks everyone for showing up. Have a great day.